The marriage contract sat on the desk like a verdict, and Naomi Carter signed it without letting her hand shake. The pen was heavier than it should have been, gold-plated, engraved with a crest she did not recognize. Around her, the office rose 60 floors above Seoul, glass walls turning the city into a field of light beneath her feet. She wore white, not because she wanted to, but because that was the arrangement. The dress fitted to her curves by a tailor who had measured her without meeting her eyes, murmuring numbers into a tablet like she was a shipment to be sized for a crate. Across the desk, Kang Joon-ho watched her sign with the stillness of a man who had already decided how the next hour would go. He did not smile. He did not offer congratulations. He simply reached for the contract when she was finished, checked her signature against the line as if verifying a transaction, and set it inside a leather folio that closed with a soft, final click. "You understand what this means," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that did not need volume to fill a room. "I understand what you told me it means," Naomi said. "Whether that's the truth is a different question." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not amusement, exactly. Recognition, maybe, that she was not going to make this easy by pretending gratitude. She had been chosen from a list, she knew that much. A business proposal from her uncle's failing textile company, an old debt owed to a man named Kang Sung-min who had died 6 months ago and left an empire to a son nobody expected to survive the transition. Joon-ho needed a marriage that looked clean on paper, one that would not raise the interest of rivals circling for a piece of the empire while its new head was still finding his footing. Naomi needed her uncle's company to survive, which meant her family needed the debt erased, which meant she was standing in a stranger's office in a wedding dress at 9 in the morning, negotiating her own life like a contract clause. She had flown in 4 days earlier, alone, carrying a single suitcase and a folder of documents her uncle had pressed into her hands at the airport with trembling fingers, apologizing the entire drive there for what he was asking of her. Naomi had told him to stop apologizing. She had made the decision herself, clear-eyed, the same way she made every decision that mattered, weighing the cost, accepting it, and refusing to spend energy regretting a choice already made. "They call you the forgotten bride," Joon-ho said, watching her face for a reaction. "The men in this building. They think I chose someone no one else would want." "And what do you think?" He studied her for a long moment, longer than politeness required. "I think you signed that contract with a steadier hand than my own lieutenant did when I promoted him to his post." It was not a compliment, not quite, but it was not nothing either. Naomi filed it away, the way she filed away every detail in this building. The security detail stationed at each elevator bank, the way the assistants averted their eyes when Joon-ho passed, the framed photograph on the side table of a woman who was clearly his mother and clearly gone. A knock interrupted them. A man entered without waiting for permission, tall, sharp-suited, his expression already arranged into disdain before his eyes landed on Naomi. "The board is asking for the schedule," he said. "They want to know when the announcement goes out. And they want to know." His gaze flicked to Naomi's dress. "If this is a joke." "It is not a joke, Taeyong," Joon-ho said, and something in his tone made the man's jaw tighten. "Tell the board the announcement goes out tonight." Taeyong's eyes lingered on Naomi a moment longer, calculating something she could not name, before he left. The door shut behind him harder than necessary. "He does not approve of me," Naomi said. "He does not approve of anything that was not his idea," Joon-ho said. "Do not mistake his opinion for something that matters." But she had already learned enough about this world to know that opinions in rooms like this one had a way of becoming knives later. She said nothing, only smoothed the fabric of her dress and looked out at the city that was, as of this morning, apparently going to be some version of her home. Joon-ho moved to the window, hands in his pockets, studying the skyline like a man calculating territory rather than admiring a view. "There'll be an event tonight," he said. "A dinner. You will be introduced as my wife to people who will be looking for a reason not to believe it. And if they find one, then we give them nothing to find." He turned to face her fully for the first time since she'd walked in. "Can you do that?" Naomi lifted her chin. "I ran a non-profit legal clinic in Atlanta for 6 years defending people the system had already decided to throw away. I've stared down judges who wanted to see me fail before I open my mouth. I think I can survive one dinner. Something shifted in his expression, brief, almost imperceptible. Not warmth. Interest. As if he had expected a different answer, and was recalibrating around the one he'd gotten. Good, he said. Because there are people in this city who believe an empire built by my father cannot survive being inherited by a son they never trusted, and they've been waiting for a mistake since the day he died. Tonight is not a wedding celebration. It is the first move in a war I do not intend to lose. Naomi looked at him for a long beat. The man she had married an hour ago to save her family's company, a man whose empire she had somehow, without meaning to, just agreed to help defend. Then you'd better tell me the rules of the war I just married into, she said. Because I don't intend to lose either. For the first time since she had walked into the room, Kang Joon-ho almost smiled. He spent the next hour, unexpectedly, walking her through the shape of his world instead of dismissing her to the residence, as she had assumed he would. He explained the structure of the organization in plain terms, the lieutenants who answered to him, the territories that made up the bulk of legitimate revenue, the shipping routes that made up the rest. He did not explain everything she noticed. He told her enough to keep her from being blindsided in public, and no more than that, and she understood this was not caution born of secrecy alone but of a man who had learned, the hard way, that information given freely was information that could be used against you by someone who did not deserve it. Why tell me any of it? Naomi asked, if you don't trust me yet. Because you'll be standing beside me at dinners like tonight's for the rest of both our lives, Joon-ho said, and a wife who does not understand the ground she is standing on is a liability I cannot afford. Trust and necessity are not the same thing. I am extending you the second. The first will have to be earned. Fair enough, Naomi said and meant it. She had built her entire career on exactly that principle. Trust was not owed. It was constructed, brick by brick, out of consistent behavior over time, and she respected a man who understood the difference, rather than pretending affection he did not yet feel. The dinner was held in a private hall on the top floor of a hotel Joon-ho's family had quietly owned for 2 generations, the kind of place where the marble had never known a stain, and the staff moved like they had been trained not to see anything at all. Naomi stood at the entrance in a dress that had replaced the bridal white with a deep emerald that Joon-ho's assistant had produced without explanation, and she understood, walking in on his arm, that every set of eyes in the room was already deciding what she was. She felt it before she saw it, the particular quality of attention reserved for someone being measured and found wanting. Conversations paused at their table. A woman in a silver gown leaned toward her companion and murmured something behind a raised glass. Naomi kept her spine straight and her expression pleasant, the same posture she had used walking into courtrooms that assumed guilt before she spoke a word. They are surprised, Joon-ho said quietly, close enough that only she could hear. They expected someone smaller. Someone who apologizes for the space she takes up. I don't apologize for space, Naomi said. I know, he said. That is precisely the problem for them. They were seated at the head table beside a man introduced as Minister Cho, a heavy-set official whose smile did not reach his eyes, and whose first words to Naomi were a question about how, exactly, an American lawyer had come to marry into a Korean business family, delivered with the particular condescension of a man expecting her to fumble. She did not fumble. She answered him the way she had answered opposing counsel for 6 years. Precisely, without apology, offering just enough truth to be unassailable and nothing more. A woman further down the table, introduced only as the wife of a shipping magnate, leaned across to ask Naomi, with a smile sharpened to look like curiosity, whether she found the transition to Korean customs difficult, whether she felt out of place among people who had known Joon-ho's family for generations. Naomi met the question head-on rather than deflecting it. I find that every room I've ever walked into has people convinced I don't belong in it, she said, and every single time, the belonging was never in question. Only their comfort with it. The woman's smile faltered, just slightly, and did not return for the rest of the meal. Joon-ho watched the exchange without interfering, and she understood, somewhere in the middle of it, that he was testing her as much as the room was. It was near the end of the second course, when the first crack appeared. A server approached the table with a tray, and Naomi noticed, in the half-second before he set the tray down, that his hand trembled and his eyes moved to Junho's water glass and away again too quickly. 6 years of reading nervous witnesses had taught her what fear looked like on a face, trying not to show it.
She did not think.
She acted. "I'm terribly clumsy," she said, standing abruptly and letting her elbow catch the edge of the table, sending Junho's water glass toppling before the server had even set the tray down fully. Water spread across the white tablecloth. Apologies rose from her mouth, smooth and immediate, the kind of performance she had given 100 juries, while beneath the noise of napkins and murmured concern, she watched the server's face go pale and his hands, still holding the tray, shake harder. Junho's eyes found hers across the commotion. He had seen it too, not the spill, but the reason for it. "Take the tray to the kitchen," Junho said to the server, his voice pleasant, unbothered, betraying nothing. "Bring a fresh setting." The server left. He did not come back. The rest of the dinner proceeded as though nothing had happened. Toasts offered, congratulations extended by people who did not mean them, the orchestra in the corner playing something classical and forgettable, and only Naomi and Junho carried the full weight of what had almost occurred, moving through the remaining hour like actors who had memorized their lines long before the curtain rose. Later, in the car taking them back to the residence, Junho did not speak until they had cleared the hotel's gates. "You notice something?" he said. It was not a question. His hands were shaking before he ever touched the glass. Naomi said, "That's not clumsiness. That's a man who knows what he's carrying is a problem and is terrified of being caught with it."
The
glass would have gone to me. "I know." He looked at her for a long moment, the streetlights sliding gold and then dark across his face. "You could have said nothing. Let it happen. Married to a corpse, you would have inherited half of everything without any of the danger of being married to me." "That's not why I signed the contract," Naomi said, "and it's not who I am." He did not answer, but something in the set of his shoulders eased, fractionally, the tension of a man recalculating a threat he had misjudged. When they reached the residence, he walked her to the door of her wing without a word, and only as she turned to go inside did he speak again. "Thank you," he said, the words clipped and unpracticed, as if gratitude were a muscle he rarely used. "Whoever sent that man will not stop with one attempt. You should know that before you decide whether staying here was the right decision." "I already decided that this morning," Naomi said, "when I signed my name." She did not know, walking into the quiet of her new bedroom, that the man who had sent the poison tray was already being questioned 3 floors below in a room with no windows, or that the answer he gave would point, however faintly, towards someone inside Junho's own house. The days that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them acknowledged out loud. Breakfast together in a kitchen too large for 2 people, conducted mostly in silence except for the low murmur of the television playing international news. Security briefings Naomi was not meant to hear, but heard anyway through the thin wall between the study and the hallway. Evenings when Junho worked past midnight and Naomi read case files from her old clinic on a tablet, unwilling to let 6 years of work simply evaporate because her address had changed continents. She began, without quite meaning to, learning the shape of the house the way she once learned the shape of a courthouse, which hallways the guards favored, which rooms Junho retreated to when a call went badly, which member of staff could be trusted to answer a question honestly, and which offered only the careful, rehearsed non-answers of people who had learned survival meant saying as little as possible. She was not gathering this information for any purpose beyond her own understanding, but it settled into her the way all useful knowledge did, quietly, waiting to matter. It was on the 4th night that she found him in the study long after the house had gone quiet, a bottle of something amber untouched at his elbow, staring at a single photograph he had not put back in its frame. The woman in the picture was young, laughing, her hand raised as if caught mid-gesture. "My mother," Junho said, without turning around, aware of her presence before she'd made a sound. "She died the year I turned 23. Not sickness. Not accident." His voice did not change register, but something underneath it went very still. "A rival family wanted my father to feel what it was to lose something he could not protect. They chose her because she was the softest part of him, the part everyone could see. I've spent every year since making certain no one ever finds a soft part of me to choose. Naomi crossed the room and sat, not beside him, but close enough that the space between them stopped feeling like distance. That's not a wound that heals by hiding it, she said. I've seen that kind of grief in 100 clients. It doesn't go away because you build walls tall enough. It just gets quieter and more dangerous. You think you understand my grief because you have read other people's files. I think I understand fear wearing the costume of control, Naomi said. I've lived across from it in a courtroom for 6 years. I know what it looks like when someone is furious at the wrong thing because the right thing is too big to be angry at. He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had not allowed himself to since the office, since the contract, since the moment she signed her name into his war, without knowing the size of it. Taeyeon came to see me tonight, he said finally. He believes the poisoning attempt came from inside our own organization. He believes it was authorized by someone close to my father's old circle. He believes, a pause waited, that it may be my cousin. Hyunwoo, Naomi said. She had met him once, briefly, at the dinner. A man who smiled too easily and watched Junho with an attention that did not match the warmth of his expression. He was like a brother to me once, Junho said. Now, I do not know what he is. Naomi did not offer comfort she did not have. Instead she said, then we find out. Carefully. Before he decides he doesn't need to hide anymore. That word, we, seemed to land somewhere in him he had not expected it to reach. He did not respond to it directly, but later, when she rose to leave, his hand found her wrist, light, uncertain, the first deliberate touch he had offered her since the wedding. Stay, he said. Not for the war. Just stay a while longer. She stayed, and they talked, not about the empire or the danger circling it, but about smaller things, the case that had made her leave private practice for the non-profit clinic, the year he had spent studying abroad before his father called him home to a life he had never asked for, the particular loneliness of being raised to inherit something enormous and being unable to trust anyone who wanted to stand close to you because of it. It was the first conversation between them that had nothing to do with contracts or wars, and when she finally returned to her own room near dawn, she realized she had not thought once, in those hours, about the debt that had brought her here. The proof came 9 days later, delivered not by confrontation but by paperwork, the kind of evidence Naomi understood better than anyone in Junho's organization, a shell account, a shipment manifest altered by a single digit, a signature that did not quite match the one on file but was close enough to fool anyone who is not trained to notice discrepancies for a living. She found it while helping Junho's finance director reconcile a supply contract that had nothing to do with her, except that 6 years of parsing fraudulent paperwork in family court had given her an eye for numbers that lied. It took her 3 full days of quiet, careful work, cross-referencing shipment logs against bank records the finance director did not realize she had access to, before the pattern became undeniable. She did not celebrate the discovery. She sat with it overnight, turning it over the way she once turned over evidence before bringing it to a judge, making certain there was no innocent explanation buried in the numbers that she was simply refusing to see. There was none. Only a lie, patient and well-constructed, built over 8 months by someone who understood the organization well enough to know exactly which cracks would go unnoticed. She brought it to Junho at midnight, laying the documents across his desk with the same steady hands she had used to sign the marriage contract. It's Hyunwoo, she said. The account routes through a company registered to his wife's maiden name. He's been skimming shipment profits for 8 months and using the money to fund something outside the organization. I don't know what yet, but it's enough to prove he lied about the audit last spring. Junho went very still, the particular stillness of a man absorbing a wound he had spent years preparing for and still was not ready to feel. You found this in an afternoon, he said. My own people missed it for 8 months. Your people were looking for a knife, Naomi said. I was looking for a lie. Different training. He picked up the pages, reading them twice, his expression giving away nothing until his hand tightened slightly at the corner of the paper. If I move against him without absolute proof, the organization fractures. Half will say I am paranoid, turning on family to secure my grip. If I do nothing, He finishes whatever he is building, and next time it will not be a poison glass at a dinner. It will be something none of us survive. Then don't move against him, Naomi said. Let him think no one has found this. Feed him a chance to expose himself completely, on his own terms, in front of the people whose trust he's trying to steal. Junho looked at her for a long moment. You want to run this like a courtroom. I want to run it like a case I can win, Naomi said. The difference is smaller than you think. They built the trap over the following week. Quiet and precise, Naomi drafting the language of a false internal audit with the same care she'd once used drafting motions that could not be dismissed on a technicality. Junho arranging the room, the witnesses, the moment. Twice during that week, Taeyong objected openly to trusting the plan of an outsider, arguing that family matters should be settled by family, and twice Junho overruled him without raising his voice, a quiet, immovable authority that Naomi noticed left Taeyong more unsettled than any shouted order could have. It was during that week, working late at the same table, shoulders inches apart over documents that could end a war or start one, that Junho said her name in a way she had noticed before, but never let herself acknowledge. Naomi.
Just that.
Not a question, not a command. Something closer to a discovery. She looked up. What? Nothing, he said, though his eyes did not move from her face for another few seconds longer than nothing required. I only wanted to hear how it sounded, said like that. She did not answer, because there was nothing safe to say, and because some part of her that she had been guarding since the office, since the contract, since the word forgotten bride had first reached her ears through a closed door, had already stopped pretending she did not notice the way he said her name. The trap closed on a Thursday evening, in the same private hall where the wedding dinner had been held, under the pretense of a routine leadership meeting Hyunwoo had no reason to suspect. Naomi sat near the back, exactly where Junho had asked her to sit, watching the room the way she used to watch a jury box, reading faces before verdicts were spoken aloud. Junho stood at the head of the table and presented the falsified audit Naomi had built, one that appeared to clear Hyunwoo of any wrongdoing, thanking him publicly for his years of loyal service and announcing, to the visible relief of half the room, that the recent instability within the organization had been resolved. Hyunwoo smiled the smile of a man who believed he had gotten away with something. It was that smile, and the small, satisfied exhale that followed it, that Naomi had told Junho to watch for, the tell of a man who had spent 8 months afraid of discovery and had just been handed permission to stop being afraid. There is only one detail I have not mentioned, Junho said, and the room's temperature seemed to shift with his tone. The account this audit clears was never the one under investigation. That account was closed 11 months ago. The one currently under investigation is a second account, opened 3 months later, registered under a name I believe several of you will recognize. The projection behind him changed. Hyunwoo's face went the color of old paper. What happened after was not the chaos Naomi had braced for. It was quieter, more surgical, security moving without drawn weapons, no shouting, no violence, only the absolute and total collapse of a man's carefully built deniability in front of everyone whose loyalty he had been quietly stealing. Hyunwoo was escorted out through a side door, still protesting, still smiling with less and less conviction, while the room watched Junho with something that had not been in their eyes at the wedding dinner. Not surprise. Respect. Later, in the quiet of the residence, Junho found Naomi on the terrace, the city spread out beneath them in 1,000 small lights. You built that entire trap, he said, and let me stand at the front of the room and take the credit for it. That was the point, Naomi said. You needed the room to see their boss handle a betrayal without breaking. I needed the traitor gone. We both got what we needed. He came to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched hers. Taeyong told me this afternoon that the board no longer refers to you as the forgotten bride, he said. They have started calling you the one who sees what the rest of us miss. That's a mouthful for a nickname. It is accurate, Junho said, and then, quieter. I did not choose you to save an empire, Naomi. I chose you because the debt demanded it, and I told myself that was the whole of it. I no longer believe that was ever the whole of it. Naomi turned to face him fully. That's the closest thing to a confession I've heard out of you since the day I signed that contract. It is the only confession I know how to give, he said. I am not a man who says easy things easily. I noticed, she said, and something in her voice must have carried more warmth than she intended, because his hand rose, slow enough that she could have stepped back and rested against the side of her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw like he was memorizing something he had decided. Finally, he was allowed to keep. There will be more enemies, he said. Hyunwoo was not the last, and some of them will not be as easily undone as an audit and a falsified account. I didn't marry a peaceful man, Naomi said. I knew that the day I signed my name. And still you stayed. And still I'm staying, she said, because somewhere between the office and tonight, this stopped being a contract I was fulfilling and became a life I actually want. He kissed her then, careful at first, like a man testing whether the ground beneath him would hold, and when it did, when she did not pull away, the second kiss carried none of that hesitation at all. In the weeks that followed the fall of Hyunwoo, Naomi noticed a shift within the house itself, subtle but unmistakable. Staff who had once avoided her eyes now greeted her by name. Taeyong, though he never warmed to her fully, began routing certain reports through her review before they reached Junho's desk, a grudging acknowledgement that her instincts were an asset rather than an inconvenience. Even Minister Cho, at a subsequent function, made a point of seeking her out for conversation, his condescension from the wedding dinner replaced with something closer to caution, the particular respect men like him reserved for people they had once underestimated and did not intend to underestimate twice. Naomi found, to her own quiet surprise, that she no longer thought of the marriage as an arrangement she was enduring. She thought of it, when she allowed herself to think of it honestly, as a partnership she had built with her own hands out of something that had begun as nothing more than a debt on a piece of paper. The final threat came 3 weeks later, not from within, but from a rival house that had watched Hyunwoo's fall and decided the moment of transition was still an opportunity worth testing, an attempted takeover of a shipping route disguised as a legitimate business negotiation, a meeting Junho was expected to attend alone, per tradition, unarmed, as a show of good faith between houses. Naomi did not ask permission to attend. She simply informed him she was coming, dressed not in silk but in a tailored suit that made her look every inch the legal counsel she had trained 6 years to become, and reminded him that a negotiation was, at its core, simply a courtroom without a judge. They will not expect a wife who speaks, Junho said, though he did not tell her to stay behind. Good, Naomi said. I've built my entire career on being underestimated in a room. The negotiation, when it came, was a trap disguised as diplomacy, contract language designed to look generous, while quietly ceding control of Junho's most profitable route through a clause buried on the final page, the kind of clause any ordinary businessman might miss under the pressure of a room full of men waiting for him to fail. Naomi caught it before Junho's own lawyer did, standing to point out, in clear and unhurried English translated smoothly by the interpreter at her side, that Clause 14 effectively voided Clause 3, and that either the rival house had made an extraordinary drafting error, or they had assumed no one in the room would read carefully enough to notice. The rival's lead negotiator, a man who had clearly expected the bride to remain decorative and silent, went red beneath his composed exterior. He attempted, briefly, to argue the clause was merely a standard formality, but Naomi met each objection with a specific page number and precedent it violated, until the argument had nowhere left to retreat to. Junho said nothing for a long moment, watching his wife dismantle an ambush with nothing but attention to language and a refusal to be underestimated, and then he smiled, the first full smile Naomi had seen from him since the day they'd signed the contract. We will need new terms, Junho said, drafted by someone who reads more carefully than your legal team apparently does. They left the meeting with a route intact, and the rival house's reputation for cunning considerably diminished, and it was clear, walking out into the Seoul evening together, that whatever quiet war had been building since the wedding had, for now, been won, not through violence, not through fear, but through a woman no one had believed was worth choosing, proving, again and again, exactly why she had been. That night, back at the residence, Junho stood at the window with the city glittering below and said, without turning, "My father built this empire on the belief that softness gets you killed." I believed him for a very long time. Naomi came to stand beside him. And now I think he was only half right, Junho said. Softness that no one can see coming is not weakness. It is the sharpest weapon in the room because no one thinks to guard against it. He turned to face her. "You are the sharpest thing that has ever walked into my life, Naomi Carter Kong, and I intend to keep you exactly where you are." "Careful," Naomi said, though she was smiling. "That's almost romantic for a man who doesn't say easy things easily." "Do not tell anyone," he said. "I have a reputation to protect." She laughed, the sound surprising them both with how easily it came, and when he pulled her close, there was no contract between them anymore, no debt, no arrangement negotiated over a desk in a glass office, 60 floors above a city that had once called her the forgotten bride. There was only the truth of it, finally spoken without hesitation, a woman no one wanted, who had saved an empire not by being chosen for it, but by refusing to be anything less than exactly who she was. If you made it this far, you already know a good slow burn when you see one. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, hit that like button if Naomi and Junho earned it, and subscribe so you never miss the next story.